Hi, my name is Jenny, and today I am going to show you how to make a snuffle mat. Now, the kind of snuffle mat I am showing you is a machine washable snuffle mat, so there is nothing but fleece. Pretty cool things about this is you can make it, and then if your dog likes a little bit more of a challenge, you can roll it up first and have them have to unroll it. This entire snuffle mat, it ended up being about 16 by 19. Took me just under one of the really cheap fleece blankets that you can get from like Walmart or the Dollar General, the dollar store, anything like that. It was a really fun project. It took me about 2 hours to make and film the entirety of the project. Probably take you about 45 minutes to an hour to do everything if you're not filming or stuff like that. I am super happy with it. It turned out great. This is the final product that we'll be making today. It has both a traditional snuffle mat and some optional pockets. And so let's get started. Okay, so the material we're going to be using is no-peel fleece. I am actually using some of those old cheap fleece blankets that you can get from like Walmart or Dollar General for a couple bucks. But you can use any fleece material. You can also use denim, corduroy. I have made one where some of the pockets I used old jeans that had been completely ripped apart. I used them to make some of the pockets. All you're going to want to basically make sure that you do is the materials you use, you don't want them to be like cotton where it's an interwoven material. You want them to be like fleece or denim where you can't really see any of the stitches because when they look like that, they're a lot easier to tear. So you're going to want something that your dog's not going to be able to absolutely destroy should they get too hyper. You're also going to want something that doesn't stain. So again, fleece, denim, corduroy, any of those materials. Burlap. I mean, honestly, you can just use, I typically just use any materials that are left over. Unless you're making this for like to sell, it doesn't have to look the greatest, like, because it's for a dog. So it's only what you want in terms of prettiness you have to make. So what we're first going to do is we are going to make the base for this guy for the base for the guy. And so what I have done is I'm making a pretty large snuffle mat. And so I have 2 pieces of fleece that are about 22 by 21 sheet squares. Basically, what I'm doing is you could just use one piece. That's what this guy is. It's literally just one piece of fleece that's sewn down, and it is pretty sturdy. Like, it is thick, but I wanted to try using 2 here to give it a little bit of thickness to discourage my dog from flipping it over, which she sometimes likes to do. So yeah, so I'm going to be using 2. You can use 1. The idea is you have to remember, if you want this to look nicer, you're going to want to finish your edges. So whatever size you want, make sure you account for finished edges. I tend to go pretty generous on my seam allowances. I like about like 3/4 to 1/4 inch seam allowance. So if I have a 20 by 22 inch piece of fabric, I'm losing 2 inches on each side because I'm losing an inch per side. So it's going to end up being an 18 by 20 piece of fabric. You don't have to worry about that. For y'all that are newer sewers, this this tutorial, if you can sew a straight line, you're completely fine. You don't even have to sew a straight line. When I was testing, I used this just to test. You can see my lines were not straight. They were just a trial run, and it turned out fine. You don't have to hem them, but I was pretty lazy with my cuts. They're not the most even in the world. So I'm going to go ahead and basically sew these two pieces together, turn them inside out. And that will make a pretty nice finished edge for the base. What you can do is if you're using one piece, just go ahead, if you decide to hem, just turn under and sew, and just sew a hem to it. And let's do that. Okay, so I'm back. What I have done is I have put both sides of the material together, and I've sewn on all 4 sides, everything except for this little bit here, this hole here, and that's going to be where I'm going to turn my fabric. Sewing it like this and then turning it allows you to have a really clean seam. And so it's going to look really stupid. And then we can start pulling it out. One thing I forgot to say before we started sewing was if you are doing just a one sheet, if your machine has the ability, I recommend doing a zigzag stitch or some kind of stitch that will allow for a little bit more like strength. Simply because you don't want your dog grabbing that hem and pulling it if you're top stitching a hem there. All right, so now we just getting all the dog hair off of it. So now you can see we have some really nice clean edges. It doesn't look like as crazy. And then I do have this hole here, and I'll just go in later with a blanket stitch. It's also called a ladder stitch, I believe. It makes a really nice hidden seam, and it will look just like the rest of it to sew that up. You don't need interfacing or anything like that. The weight of everything, I mean, you can see this is one layer, and it doesn't flop around. Like, it is pretty sturdy in its like wiggliness, and that's like all we want. We just want to have a good base so that it has a little, so once we sew everything down, it's got a little bit of weight to it just to prevent the dog from flipping it over. But it's not a huge deal if your dog already has snuffle mats and doesn't tend to try to sniff under it. You'll be fine. You can probably just use the single layer. And so let me go ahead and get the other pieces cut out, and I'll show you what we're gonna do next. Okay, so I have gone out and cut our next fabric out. So the idea is now we are going to make the traditional snuffle part of the snuffle mat, which is the very floppy guys. The great thing about these guys is treats can sit on top, in between the layers, and on the bottom with the layers hanging over. This really allows the dog to have to like actually search, dog or cat, search for their treats. So what we are doing is we are going to be doing a half mat like this guy. However, if you want to make a full snuffle mat where the entire thing is the snuffle, that's completely fine. It's really simple to do. It actually makes things actually simpler because you don't have to make the extra pockets on them. So now what I can show you is what I've done is I have basically measured how far across I want the snuffle to go. Let me get this guy laid out for you. So what I have, see if I can get that in frame. I have decided that that's how far across I want it to go. So I cut this out, and what I'm basically going to be doing is I'm going to be sewing it down, and then it'll leave this side free. So what you're gonna want with these squares is I have found that 6 inches across gives you a really good amount of floppiness to it without losing too much. If it was too heavy, it will just fall over and not give you any of like the 3D-ness. These guys are 6 inches across in a denim material. It's actually an old packing blanket, but it's made out of recycled denim is what these guys were made out of. But it's a similar thickness to the fleece. And so what I've done is you're gonna want if your machine can sew through 3 layers of fleece plus your base, you're gonna want 3 layers of fleece. If your machine can't sew through that amount, that's okay. You can limit to maybe 2 layers of fleece or even 1 layer. You're just gonna have more rows. But what I'll show you, what we're doing is, the idea is we're going to sew. Let me get this laid out. I'll lay it out like this so you can see it. Okay, so I switched my camera views so I could get this a little bit more easier to explain. What we're going to do, the idea is we're going to sew down a single in the middle, a single stretch down the middle. We're going to go down and back. And then the idea is then we're going to sew this guy really close down the middle. And I'm going to be showing this step by step so this makes more sense. And then the idea is they would be, all the different strands are going to be pushing on each other and pushing each other up, which is, let me get the old one out, which is actually how this guy, you see how full he is? Actually, what it is, let me get the first guy all folded. They tend to just do what they want to do after you've sewn it. Okay, so this is actually one of these strands. It's sewn down and then cut. And then here is the next guy. And you can see that these guys are like pushing up on each other, which is what you're doing. You're basically sewing a bunch of fabric really close together and then cutting it. And all the different strands sit and push up against each other. Did I take it with me? No, okay. So what we're going to do to start with is we're going to lay this guy out. Again, you're going to want 6 inches across, and then the length is going to be however much you want to cover of the blanket. If you want the blanket to be full, the length of this should be equal to about the length of the blanket. We're not doing any more hemming or anything. We're just doing straight lines at this point. So the size of what you cut is the size that it's going to cover. Now, because my machine can handle 3 layers, I'm going to be having 3 layers of fleece. I got this like chevron blanket for donating blood, and I think it'll maybe do some cool colors. So yeah, so what you're going to do is you're going to layer these nice on each other. And the first guy I typically have just with edge to edge, just because I think having that just not flopping over makes it look neater. And then I'm going to pin him. See if I can pin one-handed. Ouch, no, I can't pin one-handed. That's fine. So you're going to pin it, and then you're going to sew straight down the middle. I say straight, it does not have to be straight. Once you cut this, which I'll show you how to cut, we're going to cut in steps. You are not going to be able to tell if this looked weird. The only way that you would be able to tell is on this side. And the way that you could end up hiding the seams on these guys is sewing it on a base and then doing the double layer later. I know if y'all are new to sewing, don't worry about that. If you sewn before, you probably are getting what I'm talking about. So yeah, so I'm going to put these 3 guys down. I'm going to sew down and back. Before I was doing down and back on these guys, and I just did down and back on my pockets. But you're going to want to run through it at least twice, so down and back, just to make sure it's secure. If you're really worried about the dog pulling, you can do another down and back, but just make sure it is tacked down enough that the dog won't be able to tear it off. Okay, so I have gone and sewn this guy down and back. Great thing is I would like to claim I'm using a different color thread to make it easier for teaching. I'm not. I only have yellow thread right now for this. And you cannot tell I'm using yellow thread because with how much fabric that we're sewing through, you just can't tell. It doesn't matter if they can see it. Once you cut all this up, this interior bit is never going to be seen. I was really careful to make sure I got all the way to the end on both of these guys because these are going to be strips and I don't want it half sewn down. So, as you can see, we have these nice 3. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we are going to cut the strips so you can see what we're going to, so you can start seeing how this is going to work. So what we're going to do is we are going to cut all 3 of these guys together all the way down as close as we can to the seam without cutting through the seam. I found the easiest way, we don't want to cut through this, is just to fold it. So we kind of just have this guy sitting here and then to just cut down. You're going to want to do somewhere between 1 inch to 3/4 of an inch strips. The more strips you have, the more full it's going to look. It's going to help elevate the fullness of it. Just if they get too thin, they could start stretching. So you're going to want to find that happy medium. So yeah, so what we're going to do is it's kind of hard for me to show you, is I am going to cut all the way, so I cut all the way down till pretty close to the seam. And you can see now we have 3, this one's skinnier just because the material wasn't quite lined up. I'm not super picky on this stuff. It's going to look like a crazy Snuffle mat. You're not going to be able to tell any slight variations in how the material is pinned. So yeah, so I'm just going to go through and I'm going to cut this whole side and I'll come back before I cut the other side. Alrighty, so I've gone ahead and I've cut both sides and you can start to see we are already getting some awesome like Snuffle mat looking material. I'm going to go ahead and switch to the other view and I'm going to show you how we're going to pin the next guy. Okay, so what I've done is here is this guy that we just sewed. I flipped everybody over, so that's my seam right there. And now the idea is we want the so if you imagine this with the seam down here, this half is going to be the strips that are touching these guys. Now we're gonna want these guys to be pretty nice and touching each other, so we encourage it to sit upwards. Now on my last Snuffle mat that I did, I literally put this right on these edges here. Like I literally just lined up the edge with this, with the kind of like seam of this, and it looked really good. Let me see, can I grab it? Sorry, okay. And I really like the fullness of this. Like I love it, it's perfect for my dog. I'm going to be experimenting with putting them a little bit closer just to see if I like how tall it is. But if you just want like simplicity of lining up, just line these edges right up like this. I'm going to be trying to putting them a little bit closer. So I think I'm going to give it kind of like about 1 inch lifted up on this side. And then I am going to pin it and sew down it up, and I'll show you all what I have next. Okay, so I have gone ahead and done the second one, and as you can see, these guys, once I cut them, they are going to push up with each other and make the 3D fluffiness of the Snuffle mat. I'll go ahead and cut both sides and I'll come back. Okay, so I've gone ahead and just cut up that second one just like the first, and you can see here's the separation of them, and it is already looking awesome. Like you can just see how thick and how many nooks and crevices the dogs are going to have to be able to play around in. And so what I'm basically going to do is I'm going to do exactly like what I have just showed you, all the way across. I might come back in maybe halfway through and show you the rest, but I will see y'all when this is either done or mostly done. All right, just showing again, I got 3 done. I'm halfway through. I basically stick it so that the edges are nice and up against this guy, and then I just pull them about 1 inch higher just to get them nice and close together, and then I sew down and back. Okay guys, I am at the last one, and the one thing I've done is just to ensure that it looks neat. So since this side, I lined it up so that these guys kind of hang over and they don't flop over too much. I just wanted it to look neat, So ignoring how we've been lining it up in the past, this last guy, I just lined this edge up with this. It's going to have some over, but it'll just flip over on this side, and it will keep this edge looking as clean as the other edge. All right, let's get to it. Okay, I have finished sewing this, and I am super happy with this. Honestly, it took me maybe, maybe like 5 minutes per guy, so there's 6 of us, about 30 minutes to sew this, but I'm also filming and watching YouTube videos as well, so it took me a lot longer than it should have. This is super thick. I'm really happy with the distance I did. Like I showed you before, this is the side that I just lined up, so it doesn't fall too far over, which I'm happy with. It's not a big deal if you just want it to look neater. And then the side looks good. It looks good. Any irregularness in how, if they're lined up, you just can't tell. It just falls right over. And it is nice and thick. I am super happy with this. Alrighty, I will get back to the other view. Okay, so we are done with the traditional Snuffle mat portion. It looks absolutely amazing. I'm super happy with it. The back looks nice and quilted. I love that. If you don't like that, I know I've hinted to it while I was doing other stuff, but I was a little crazy. What you can do is you can sew the Snuffle onto one layer, and then just do the steps that we did before, where you then put the other layer of fabric down, sew it, turn it inside out. Just make sure you do it correctly so that when you turn it inside out, this guy is actually inside out. So you'd want to put the second layer. Do I have another piece of fabric? I have a small piece. So what you would want to do is you would want to put the second layer of base over the Snuffle material so that when you sewed it and flipped it inside out, it would flip over and would leave you with the seam. But honestly, I really like the quilted look. I think it just gives it some cool texture. This guy is very firm. I'm not worried about her flipping it over or anything like that. And so if you've decided to do the complete all the way down, you are done. Probably took you, for me, it would probably take me about 30 minutes to sew all the strips and to cut them, and then everything else. So hopefully if you've just done the one, it's about an hour-long project. Now, if you've left some space, we can move to the second part. And what I want to do is, if I get my tester out, I want to make 2 different kinds of pockets to just add a little bit more of a brain challenge, not a smell challenge. So I want to add one of these, which is a circle with little pockets. It's literally just 2 circles with a cross sewn across. And what that does is it allows for you to tuck treats in the pockets. Leia likes to stick her nose into these and flip them up. And then she kind of like sticks her teeth and kind of pulls it over and grabs it. This she actually like sniffles in. And then the other guy I want to do is I want to make another one of these, which I'm super happy with. What it basically is it's a deep pocket, this guy, a medium-sized pocket, and then a shallow pocket. And she like can almost, she's a corgi, so her head can almost fit completely in the deep pocket. And this makes her really have to like work to get the treats. So what I'm first going to do is I'm going to cut out one of these. And what I've basically done is I've found 2 bowls that are different sizes, and I've ensured that this bowl fits in the hole left over. You just want 2 bowls and the diameter of both of them to be a good amount of difference in between them. So I'm going to go ahead and cut out the material, and I will get back and show you how to pin it and sew it. Okay, so what I've done is I've cut out the material for the 2 different kinds of pockets that I am doing. I have 2 circles for the circle pocket. I just took the bowls, traced with a really faint marker on the side that I didn't want showing, and then cut them out. Circles are hard to cut. It's a circle. It's got a little bit of a flat edge, but that's fine. And then for the pocket, what I did is I kind of just made a square that fit in the area that I wanted the pocket to sit in. And then I cut out one that was 100% of the square. Get that lined up. And then I cut out another one in this contrasting fabric that's about 2/3 of the square. And then finally I cut out one that is about 1/3 of the square. So we can get that like alternating pocket depths while still giving a good amount of space. So I'm gonna go ahead and flip the camera and show you how I am lining these guys up. Okay, so what I've done is I've lined up this circle right here. I used this material here and then this guy to give us an alternating colors. And so yeah, just big circle, then little circle. And then this guy, what I did is I wanted the holes for the pockets to be here. So I did big guy, 3/4 guy, 1/3, or 2/3 guy, and then 1/3 guy, all like this. And so the idea with the pocket is you're just going to sew bam, bam. And the idea with this guy is you're just going to sew across. This is probably the hardest thing to get to look right because it is so hard to line this guy up. Don't get frustrated if it doesn't look super in the middle. It's just something that's hard to just estimate. One thing sometimes I do is I might try doing a row of pins to kind of guide my presser foot down the right path. This guy's gonna be pretty easy. Just go bam, bam, bam. In my opinion, you know, give yourself a good amount of space, because if it's too much space, you can always just trim down and give yourself a neat edge. But you would hate to have a hole in the pocket that the dog could grab and pull up on. And alrighty. Okay, so one thing I am trying here, my fabric pencil completely is broken and dead. I just put pins down exactly where I want to sew, and I'm just going to sew directly, line up with the pin, remove it, sew to the next end of the next pin, line it up, remove it, to kind of, I guess, give myself a line. It might not work, but that's what I'm going to try and do. Okay, so that actually worked out super well. It's a little slightly offset, but I think in general, the lines themselves look really, really good. And as you can see, the dog can sniff in there. So I'm just gonna pin this guy and sew him, and then we will be done with this. Are you kidding me? My bobbin ran out, and this is the last thing I have to do. It lasted so long. Alrighty, and the pocket is done. I sewed along the 3 edges, allowing some nice deep pockets to be able to store stuff in. And that is the final product. It is a very dense snuffle mat with a couple pockets on the outsides. If your machine can't handle the 3 layers of fleece on top of the base, what I recommend doing is doing the maximum layers you can and then just sewing them tighter together. So like 2 layers and then really close do the next layer, and then you can just build it up. But 3 layers, how I did the how I showed, really made an awesome snuffle mat. Okay guys, so that is it. I have my completed snuffle mat. It is nice and thick. I am super happy with it. One thing I recommend is if you're going to do this, the amount of material it cost was about one of those fleece blankets. I used about a little less than half of a fleece blanket to make the backing of this. And then I used about another half to make of the other one to do this. This, of course, like I said, the final measurements of him is looks like a 19 by 16 piece, which, just because of stretching or whatever, it's huge. My dog Leia will have no problem using it. If you want to make anything bigger, obviously you're going to need more material, and if you want to make anything smaller, you could probably make maybe 2 of just this smaller section. You could probably make 2 out of 1 blanket. If you are worried about trying it, maybe make a small one, and if it doesn't turn out the greatest, feel free to donate it to your local animal shelter. I know dogs and cats both love this. They always need supplies, and just using scrap materials is a great way to give stuff back to your local community. Feel free to leave any questions you have in the comments down below, and thank you so much.